Confirm live on Facebook.
We're live.
This guy right in between you guys. The other side, yeah. Oh, all right, put it right back.
Good afternoon, Greg Musil, the Chairman of the Charter Commission, calling this meeting to order on Monday, January 10th, 2022, which is still a little bit weird to say. Welcome to the Charter Commission. The first item on the agenda is roll call and consideration of a quorum. So Deputy Clerk Sater, would you call the roll? If you're on Zoom, please be ready in your alphabetized last name.
Wendy Bingesser. Wendy Bingesser present. Thank you. Mike Bain.
Mike Bank here.
Thank you. Karen Brownlee.
Karen Brownlee, present.
Thank you. Vicki Charlesworth.
Vicki Charlesworth, present.
Jim Denning.
Denning here.
Thank you. Jane Dirks.
Jane Dirks here.
Thank you. Jimmy Gaona. Jimmy Gaona. Tedrick Housh.
Tedrick Housh here.
Thank you. Randy Hutchins.
Randy Hutchins here.
Thank you. Chris Eiler.
Here.
Thank you. Laura Klingsmith. Thank you. Joy Costin.
Joy Costin here.
Thank you. Brent McCune.
Brent McCune here.
Thank you. Eric Michelson.
Eric Michelson here.
Thank you. Ed Peterson.
Ed Peterson here.
Thank you. Don Rattan.
Dawn Rattan is here.
Thank you. Leslie Riverola.
Leslie Riverola is here.
Thank you. Don Roberts.
Don Roberts here.
Thank you. Kyle Russell.
Kyle Russell here.
Thank you. Paula Swak.
Paula Schwak is here.
Thank you. Brenda Sharp.
Brenda Sharp, present.
Thank you. Greg Shelton. Greg Shelton. Greg Smith.
Greg Smith here.
Thank you. Zach Thomas.
Zach Thomas, present via Zoom.
Thank you. Chair Musel.
Here.
And do we have, come on. Do we have Jimmy Gaona? Do we have?
Gaona, present.
Thank you.
Great show.
And do we have Greg Shelton?
Greg Shelton had contacted me and said he would probably be joining a few minutes after 4 o'clock. So we'll keep an eye on him, and I know you'll reflect when he joins.
Thank you. So we have 24 present at the moment.
24 members of the 25 are present either by Zoom or in the room. Therefore, we do have a quorum. As I've done in the past, I've kind of explained to the listening audience and maybe remind those of us here why we are here. Every 10 years, the Johnson County Home Rule Charter, which is essentially the constitution that governs how we establish the governing body and the policies and procedures for Johnson County, is reviewed by a 25-member charter commission appointed by various stakeholders in the community. including the Senate delegation, the House delegation, the Board of County Commissioners, the major political parties, chambers of commerce, council of mayors, 2 representatives from the unincorporated parts of the county, and I may be missing a couple, but it's a very diverse group of 25 people. We've been meeting since March of 2021. Our deadline is to report to the county commission in late February of 2022. The Charter Commission by statute and by the Home Rule Charter has the authority to make propose amendments to the county charter, which were then submitted to the county commission. And if an amendment is approved by 13 votes, it must be placed on the ballot in November of the following year, or the following November. So it would be on the ballot November of 2022. Again, it takes 13 votes to do that. To date, we have not approved any proposed amendment with 13 votes. We also have the authority to make recommendations, which are non-binding, but recommendations to the elected Board of County Commissioners. And we have delayed considering those until after all proposed amendments to the charter have been considered. In addition to the Home Rule Charter, every 10 years, the Board of County Commissioners has the authority to place Home Rule Charter amendments on the ballot with 5 affirmative votes out of the 7-member county commission. So every 10 years is not the only opportunity to propose amendments to the charter, which would be placed on the ballot. Again, this commission makes no decisions other than what might be placed on the ballot. Any change to the Home Rule Charter would have to be approved by the voters of Johnson County in a November election following the recommendation of the Charter Commission. We are down to, according to the agenda today, 3 proposed amendments. Let me mention one other thing. I would appreciate and thank everybody for compliance with the rules and regulations of the KU Edwards campus, which require wearing a mask. If you're speaking, you have the right to remove your mask. But otherwise, we would hope you would wear your mask, as we are guests of this facility, and I thank everybody for compliance with that. The first action item on the agenda is consideration of approval of the January 10th, 2022 agenda, which was previously emailed to anybody. Are there questions or comments on the agenda or a motion to approve?
Motion to approve, Mike Bang.
Motion to approve by Mike Bames, seconded by Wendy Bingasser. All those in favor say aye.
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 Opposed, no. Approval of the agenda passes without any opposition votes. The next item is consideration of approval of the December 22, 2021 minutes, our last meeting. Are there any amendments or corrections to the minutes? And if not, is there a motion to approve? Let's give a moment for any amendment or any corrections or additions to the minutes. Hearing none, is there a motion to approve? Moved by Mayor Michelson, seconded by Commissioner Peterson to approve the December 22, 2021 minutes. All those in favor say aye.
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 Opposed, no. The December 22nd, 2021 minutes are approved without objection. There is no old business to come before the commission. We're ready for new business. Let me explain a little bit about, especially for the audience, where we're headed today. Going into today, we had 3 separate amendments to be considered on what we have called our second reading. Our rules establish that each proposed amendment would receive a first reading. If it received 9 votes, it would then move to a second reading, where it would be required to receive 13 votes if it wanted to be placed on the ballot. As I mentioned earlier, none have received 13 votes at this time. We had 3 amendments on our agenda today. Commissioner Hutchins has indicated that he is withdrawing his proposal as an amendment and instead will make a recommendation. The difference again being an amendment with 13 votes would be placed on the ballot. A recommendation receiving 13 votes would be a non-binding recommendation to the Board of County Commissioners. So we have two amendments that we'll consider. One is Commissioner Michelson's recommendation now for a 6-year term for the Board of County Commission Chair, and Commissioner Schwach's proposal for revising the language in 5.02 and 5.05 regarding treasurer, register of deeds, and county clerk, and the applicability of county personnel and other regulations to the sheriff and the district attorney. And we will now have 4 recommendations to consider instead of the 3 that were in the agenda. So any questions from members of the commission about where we're headed? All right, thank you. We will move into the proposed amendments. And Randy, I'm just going to have you acknowledge on the record that you're withdrawing yours as an amendment, and we'll discuss it as a recommendation. Is that right?
Randy Hutchins, yes, I am rescinding my amendment and instead submitted it for recommendation.
Okay, thank you very much. The next item is from Commissioner Michelson on the term of the elected Board of County Commission Chair. And I guess this is, I'll let you explain the difference after Linda reads it, Eric, but this is a different proposal than was presented or in front of the commission on the 22nd of December. Linda, would you read the updated proposed amendment by Commissioner Michelson?
This is a new proposal below submitted 1/6/2022. At section 2.02, the fourth sentence shall be deleted and replaced with the following. 6 commissioners shall continue to be elected to 4-year terms consistent with past practice. The 7th district commissioner, chair, shall be elected to 6-year terms, starting with the term beginning after the November 2022 election.
We had, our rules had typically been applied that there wouldn't be discussion at second reading, but this is a different proposal than we saw on December 22nd. So we will have discussion about this before we move to a vote. And I'll turn it over to Commissioner Michelson to explain his amendment.
Thank you, Chair Musil. The reason for the new language is to adjust it to cure the ambiguity raised by Mr. Rupp of the Fulston firm with respect to odd year elections. He was unable to state in his legal opinion whether that would be legal or not. So this new language keeps it on the even years, which would take care of his concerns. So to remind everyone what the genesis of this is, a clear structural unfairness in the black and white language of the current Charter Commission, which requires that the chair be elected in the same election as 3 of the districts, the same 3 districts every 4 years, which means those 3 incumbent commissioners cannot run for the chair position without giving up their seats. It's impossible for them to do so, which of course discourages those 3 commissioners and the residents they represent, half the county, from running for chair. In contrast, the other 3 districts every 4 years are on a different cycle, so they are free to run for chair without risking loss of their commissioner seat. So this permanent structural unfairness that is baked into the current version of the Charter Commission is in perpetuity. This has been the case since the Charter Commission, and this would be the case in perpetuity if not rectified by the voters in a charter amendment. So the original proposal was to rectify it with a 5-year term and then continuing 4-year terms to get them on an odd year cycle for the chair, so it doesn't fall on the same election as any of the 6 commissioners. But given Mr. Rupp's concern, as well as concerns from several of you commissioners who indicated that you were favorable on it, but didn't like the part about moving to an odd year election because those tend to be lower turnout elections. This amendment instead changes the chair term to a 6-year term, starting with the next term, which then would rotate the year that the chair coincides with the same election of 3 commissioners amongst the 6 districts. In other words, the chair would be on the same election as 3 of the districts once, and then the next 6, after 6 years, the next election would fall on the same election as the other 3, back and forth in a fair way, in a balanced way in perpetuity. So it fixes the structural unfairness going forward. It also coincidentally not only keeps the chair election on those higher turnout, even numbered years, it also moves every other chair election to an even higher turnout election, the presidential year election, to the extent that was important to several commissioners. So that's a summary again of the reason for it and the impact of it. And just submit this for the charter's consideration to let the voters of Johnson County decide whether they would like to continue with this structural unfairness in the election system of the county chair or fix it. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mayor Michelson. I do want to say here that what Eric referred to is we have engaged legal counsel, the Fulton Siefken firm, to look at several issues, because ultimately any amendment that would be placed on the ballot would have to have a Kansas licensed lawyer certify that it is consistent with Kansas Constitution and Kansas statutes. Mr. Rupp's opinion, I think fairly stated, would not have made that definitive determination that it was consistent. In fact, raised a number of questions about having the Board of County Commission chair elected in an odd numbered year rather than an even numbered year. And that led Eric to the revision that he has here. As we've talked about before, those legal opinions are, in the most strict term, attorney-client privilege information between this commission and our attorney, but we're disclosing them publicly, so they'll be part of the public record. And that so in 2031, when the rest of these folks are on the next charter commission, there will be a record there, and they hopefully won't have to revisit those, or at least they'll have a starting point, because those legal opinions are paid for by taxpayer dollars now. So I think we've gotten good response, and this revised presentation or proposal by Eric is in light of those that legal opinion. Questions for Eric? Questions or discussion? In the room or on Zoom? Well, I've never been able to keep my mouth shut, so I guess I'll go first if everybody else is thinking about their position. I appreciate what has been described as structural unfairness, and understand that your proposal, Mayor, makes it less permanent. But what it really does is mean every 12 years, 3 districts will have their commissioner be able to run without giving up their seat. So it is less permanent than currently, but it only occurs every 12 years. I've tried to think back about chair elections since then, and it's really hard to understand individual motivations to see whether this has discouraged people from running or not, or whether it's discouraged anybody in this year when multiple people have filed, although none of them from the 3 districts that you mentioned. As I went into the commission, as I mentioned before, I believe that when we change our charter, it should be a compelling reason to do so. I think there is a significant downside to increasing the county chair's term from 4 years to 6. It would be the longest elected official in the state of Kansas, as far as I know. The only equivalent would be our US senators who are subject to federal law. I think 6 years is a long time. We've heard a lot about accountability of individual elected officials. I would rather have the chair continue to run every 4 years, understanding that it's a position that I was in on city council. If I wanted to run for mayor in Overland Park, I had to give up my seat. So I've been there and I've thought about it and I didn't like it, but I understood that when I ran for that position. So I'm going to oppose the change to a 6-year term. Is there any other discussion or questions? Commissioner Peterson?
Does the commissioner have a mic, please?
Sorry. Yeah,
Yeah.
thank you. A question for Mayor Michelson. The proposal is that it would go into effect with the chair election after 2022, or would it be applied to the 2022 election of the chair?
It would apply to the term that starts right after that election. In other words, the winner of the 2022 election would win a 6-year term if the voters of Johnson County on that same ballot determined to correct this structural unfairness in the charter.
Is there an issue with voters voting with the possibility they're electing for a 6-year term or a 4-year term with that one vote?
None that I'm aware of. I trust the voters to make those decisions.
I can see one advantage to this, that by giving the chair a 6-year term, I think you build in enough time for a chair to accomplish most of their agenda that they would have been elected to pursue. And secondly, I think it removes some politics from the chair position. Instead of having to run every 4 years, they run for a 6-year term. It's a large community that they have to appeal to. It's an expensive election. It's a time-consuming election. And I think moving that back by 2 years removes some of the politics where you don't have a chair that's constantly worrying about raising money and running. So I think there's maybe an ancillary benefit that might accrue to this, to moving to a 6-year term.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Eiler, and then Commissioner Bain, did you have your hand up or you moving your mask? Okay, and then Jimmy. Okay.
Yeah, I think I'm going to oppose the change for a couple of reasons. One, I consider the structural unfairness to be a minor problem, one that has not been in the past significant, and not necessarily one that would be significant in the future. While I understand Mr. Peterson's comment about giving somebody 6 years to complete their agenda, it also gives them 6 years to wreak havoc. So it all depends on how good the chairman is as to whether I would want them to be there that long. But I tend to agree with our chair's position that 6 years is a long time, and it's just too long, in my opinion. I would like the opportunity to have my say with regard to the success of the chair more often rather than less often. And I think the structural unfairness, while it's right on point, I understand the point, but it's just one of those things that is, I think, so minor and so insignificant in the big picture of things that it doesn't warrant a fix that I think is unwise.
Commissioner Bain and then Commissioner Gaona.
Thank you, Chairman. I too will oppose this. I would just reference your comments into the record as being supportive of those as well. I want to clarify one thing before I add remarks though, because what I think I just heard Commissioner Michelson tell Commissioner Peterson is this would begin in the 2022 election. This clearly says after the 22 election, so it really wouldn't take effect until 2026, which is the right statement. Because the voters won't have a chance to approve. I mean, you're running for a 4 or a 6-year term until the voters have approved.
The term that begins after the November 22 election, which is how the proposed amendment reads, would be the one that the electors determine in November 2022.
So if I'm running for county chair in 2022, if it passes, I'm running for a 6-year term.
Correct.
If it doesn't pass, I'm running for a 4-year term.
That's the intent, and I believe that's the language before you, yes.
Okay. Adds confusion. I will state that number one, 6 years is a long term, and the Senate by Constitution was put in place as a deliberative body to slow down and frankly keep the House of Representatives, who are constantly running for re-election, from running amok with our country. That's a 6-year term. It was designed to slow down government and keep bad things from happening without due process and a lot of discussion. I don't think we have that with a body of 7. A senator is one of 100, one of 2 from the state, and their ability to affect change is significantly different than the ability of a chair of a body of 7. As you've stated previously, I think Commissioner Eiler said, if you've got a great chair, it doesn't matter. They'll get reelected. They'll be able to implement their agenda. If a bad chair sits here, a lot of time that we could lose a lot of momentum as a county, do some serious damage to staff and a whole bunch of other things that I think as a voter, I would want more control over that. Going to 6 years would also be the only one of its kind in local government in the state of Kansas that I'm aware of, other than Prairie Village. Every city council and other commissioners have.
We don't have 6 years in Prairie Village.
I'm sorry, you're right. You changed that from the odd year. Never mind. All the rest of us, though, every council member, and as far as I'm aware of, county commissioner in the state of Kansas, a portion of that body risks their seat every time they're up for an election or a re-election. I don't think this is that big of a hardship that we want to go try and do things, experiment of this nature, in light of the potential downside of a 6-year term.
Mr. Gaona, Greg Janny, the mic. And turn that mask inside out, please.
Yeah.
You're in the right place.
Thanks, Chair. Jimmy Gaona here. I just was curious, and I apologize if it was covered in the last meeting, but the current chair is he from which side of the 3? The one that has to give up a seat, or the one that has opportunity to run without?
Was Commissioner Eiler a first, second, or 4th district commissioner before being
he's
elected
4th.
chair? He was 4th. Okay, so he did have to give up his seat when he ran for chair. If he
I
was
think
a
the
4th
prior one was from the other one. And I think in this current year, you see candidates from the seats who are able to run without giving up their chair, but no candidates from the seats where they would have to give up their chair are running currently.
Okay. Not sure if I got the answer there.
Well, I think current chair Ed Eiler is lives in District
4.
Oh, no.
Yeah. So 4 would be the one. So the current chair had to give up his seat in order to become the chair.
Right.
And he's been the consecutive chair 3 times, correct?
It's 1, 2, and 4. Am I remember right, Eric? 1, 2, and 4 have to give up their seat to run. 3, 5, and 6 do not.
That's my understanding. And that Chair Eiler did have to give up his seat to run the first time. And his predecessor was from one of the districts who did not. And again, currently, all the candidates are from the seats who do not have to give up their chair, to the extent they're commissioners at all right now.
That help, Jimmy?
Yep.
Kyle, I'm sorry.
I share some of the comments that have been made, but I'm going to vote to put this on the ballot. I think this is my personal opinion. It's not an earth-shattering issue, but it is an unfairness. In a perfect world, I would probably have the county chair, county commission chair as a 4-year term instead of a 6-year term, but you can't have both. And I think this is a perfect type of situation where you just let the voters decide. And if the voters think this is structural imbalance is big enough to fix, they fix it. And if they don't think it's important enough, they vote to leave it the way it is. And I think we'll all move on with that. I will point out that a difference, I think Mayor Michelson has pointed this out before, a difference between this situation and most city council situations is that you have in most cities, at least in Johnson County, you have 2 city council members representing each area. So there's one that would have to give up their seat to run for mayor and one that wouldn't unless the mayor's election falls on an odd year. But I agree, it's not an enormous earth-shattering problem, but I think it is the kind of thing that can only be fixed by a charter amendment. I mean, a lot of these things that we've been discussing could be fixed by the county commission themselves if they wanted to fix it or had the political will to fix it. This thing can only be fixed, I think, by a charter amendment because the charter currently provides otherwise, and it has this structural imbalance built in. So I would just say, let the voters vote it up or vote it down. And if they don't think it's that big a deal, vote it down.
Commissioner Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to make sure I'm absolutely clear on this. The person running for chair in this upcoming election, if the amendment was approved, would be moved from a 4-year term to a 6-year term. Is that correct?
That is the intent. We do not have a legal opinion on this changed proposal. So I think it does raise a question in my mind as an attorney as to whether that could go into effect January 1 of 2023 or would have to wait till the next one. I think at this point, I would suggest we go ahead and vote on it, assuming you can do it in 2023. And if a legal opinion comes back otherwise, we would ask to delay it if there was still 13 votes to do it. Because I don't know the answer to that. I had not thought about that before today. Mayor Michelson?
I would submit that piece of this doesn't change from the prior amendment. Remember, the prior version called for a 5-year term to take effect with this next election. So if that had been a legal problem, I assume our legal counsel would have identified that in his review of the prior amendment, because that legal point would not change between the 2 versions. So I would be surprised. I think we do have a legal review of that concept, and he didn't identify any issues with it.
Well, my concern is if that is the case, the voters have no idea if they're voting for a 4 or 6-year term when they vote for whoever's running for chair. And that may influence somebody on their vote. They may decide they don't want somebody to serve 6 years and vote for somebody different. But I echo many of the comments that I've heard in here. 6 years is way too long for a local official to hold a seat. I don't know of any other seat in Kansas other than a federal senator that does that. So for those reasons, I'll be voting against it.
I'm looking at the legal opinion that we did receive on your prior proposal. It stated, quote, "The legal question is whether the county chair who serves as a member of the county commission can be elected at a general election occurring in an odd numbered year." So as unquote, so as defined, I don't think they looked at when it could become effective based on when it might be passed by the voters. So I think that's still an open question, and we can close it if we get to that. So, Brenda Sharp on Zoom.
Thank you, Commissioner and Chair. I think I'm going to be voting in favor of this, and I'll tell you why. I think that we've tried to tackle it from every which way, but at the end of the day, it is still a structural unfairness. And I've tried to find another way to back into this, wondering, for instance, if there were any possibility of making it a requirement that all commissioners resign before seeking the chairmanship. And I think that reaction would be incredibly strong and negative. But that's in fact what we're forcing half of our county representatives to do. So I do plan to vote in favor of it. I can't think of a better way to get to it. I'm not thrilled about 6 years. And I do think you can educate voters, and the candidates that are running can educate them that they would be running for a potential 4 or 6 year. I wish there was a better way, but this to me just does address an unfairness that I think was baked in, hopefully unintentionally, but now that we've had 20 years of practice, we know what the reality is, and I'd like to see it corrected.
Thank you, Commissioner Sharp. Commissioner Housh?
Thanks. This is one where, again, I struggle with it. My initial reaction was the 5-year odd term was intended as a temporary measure, and then you get back on the 4-year track. And this is different. This is the immediate comparison that came to my mind was the President of the United States and the President of France, which is 6 years. And it always seems to me that's kind of long, just knowing what I know about that situation. But for a local official to be in office for 6 years and really is supposed to be a first among equals, I think, of the other commissioners, it transcends this position into something else that I don't think was really foreseen by the charter. I've been trying to think too of I haven't thought of what Brenda said, which is, make everyone quit their current position in order to run. That would be fairer. It might raise consternation. I was thinking when we ever, because of population growth, have to add commissioners, maybe at that time we can start thinking now about a way to structure it so that you change the rhythm of these elections so that this doesn't happen to the same 3 commissioners. But 6 years just seems too long to me, and it isn't something that we've gotten a lot of public input on. The only thing I've seen is a few counties. I think there was one recently in Georgia, I think, that moved from, they had all their commissioners on 2-year terms and moved them to 4 because all they were doing was like Congress running all the time. Here, I think it's a thoughtful solution. I think, though, the solution causes more problems than it solves. So I'll be opposing.
Thank you, Commissioner House. Commissioner Costin?
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. I wonder, can somebody explain why it wouldn't be possible to just change the charter so that all commissioners don't have to give up their seat if they run?
Well, you would have somebody running for 2 positions, and that's a statutory issue, I believe. No? Okay. Commissioner Russell has the answer. I don't know. I would think you can't have 2 people running.
I'm not sure I have the answer or not, but I was sitting here thinking, and I may have the same thought that Commissioner Costin had, which is that if you want to fix the structural imbalance and you want to comply with Mr. Rupp's legal opinion and keep everything on even numbered years, but you don't want to give anybody a 6-year term, the only way I can think of to do that would be to have all 6 commissioners other than the chair come up on either presidential years or non-presidential years and then have the chair come up in the other like 2 years later. That way, if you get on a track, and I hate to, amend things on the fly, and maybe if this is going to be voted down, but people are open to that idea. I haven't run it by Mayor Michelson yet, but I think if the concern is with the 6-year term, and we have to be on even numbered years, and we want to fix the structural imbalance, that's the only way you can do it, is to have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6 up at the same time, and then the chair up in between.
That,
And I don't mean to put words in Joy's mouth. I don't know if that's the kind of solution you were thinking of or looking for or not, but that's the only thing I can think of.
Well, what is the origination of this idea that only these 3 commissioners have to give up their seats, but the others don't? So where did that originate? And is that an easier fix?
it originated with the 2000 Charter Commission and the vote that was presented to the voters in November of 2000 and adopted with that provision in the charter. Now, another way to do that, I suppose, would make the chair a 2-year term so that every 2 years, the sitting district commissioners could then run, because they're on 4-year terms. But I assume that wasn't, I'm not proposing that. That's the only other way I can think of doing it.
Well, for the reasons that Mayor Boehm articulated, although I know he was trying to use that as a reason not to do this, I would, if I had to pick between a 2-year term and a 6-year term, I like that the leadership would have the continuity. And, you know, the policy and some of these, all of us who work in local government know that there's real time and then there's city and local government time, and things take a long time, years. So for the reasons that Mayor Boehm articulated, why our founding fathers deemed it to be prudent to have one body in a 6-year term, especially when others had shorter terms, I'm wary of going to 2-year terms for the leadership position. I agree, Chairman. My 2 cents.
Section 2.02 of the Home Rule Charter established the staggering of the commissioner elections, with 3 of them being elected to 2-year terms in 2002, and the others being elected to 4-year terms. So that's the origination of it. I don't have anything more than that in front of me. Mayor Boehm?
Somebody please confirm for me, prior to the Charter Commission, we had a body of 3, correct? Or was it 5? It was 5 and it went to 7. At that time, the chair was elected by the board itself as opposed to the public, and it tended to rotate around. So really you had a 1-year term, you got nothing done, because by the time you got your feet under on any issue, it was over. And someone else started their agenda and it was over. And I think the original intent of the Charter Commission was to get this out, add bodies, and get this out to a opportunity where the chair and the commissioners, for that matter, had the opportunity to establish some policies and get them implemented and make the tweaks necessary under the same group of people. With that in mind, I appreciate you using my quote unquote against me or against Greg. But 2 makes no sense at all. We corrected that 20 years ago by adding terms and taking the commission chair to the people as opposed to a somewhat rotation in nature, and the term was way too short to accomplish anything. So I certainly would not support a 2-year term.
Somebody somewhere is going to tweet that Muse will support the 2-year term for chair. And I want to make it clear that was simply a hypothetical and theoretical thing that would, I think, solve the problem if we wanted to solve it that way. I've got Commissioner House and then Commissioner Peterson. And we've spent a lot of time on this. I don't want to cut it off, especially Randy. Thank you for giving us more time to talk about this.
Just briefly, we don't have term limits, so I don't know how frequently a commissioner runs right at the end of their first term versus if you've stayed for a second term and then are running. It seems to make that problem less if you're dealing with someone who's giving it up after having served for 7 years. That was the only thought that came to my mind as I think through this. I grant it's an inequity, and if we could come up with a way to solve it, it'd be great, but that's the only thing that came to my mind.
Thank you, Commissioner Peterson.
On the issue of staggering the terms, Cindy, wasn't that the tradition prior to the current charter? When we had 5, there were 2 elected and then 3 elected in the following 2 years. I think that's pretty much traditionally the way Kansas county commissions are elected.
And again, I don't know from a legal opinion standpoint whether that's mandated or not. I know that the downside of electing all 6 in the same election was you'd have 6 brand new commissioners, which is what I think we've tried to avoid at cities and county government. But any other comments? I see none in the room. Any comments from those on Zoom before I call for a vote? All right, we are voting on the proposition that the chair would be I'm just going to state it this way, Eric. The chair would be elected to a 6-year term whenever it legally could be accomplished, whether that's January 1 of 2023 or January 1 of 2027. Is that fair enough?
Fair enough, Chair.
Everybody, any questions on that? Please call the roll.
I would state that Greg Shelton came in during that item. Wendy Bingesser.
Wendy Bengesser, no.
Mike Bame.
Mike Bang, no.
Karen Brownlee.
Karen Brownlee, no.
Vicky Charlesworth.
No.
Jim Denning.
Denning votes no.
Jane Dirks.
Jane Dirks, no.
Jimmy Gaona. That's a no. Tedrick House.
No.
That's a no.
That's a no.
Yes, thank you. Randy Hutchins. That's a no. Chris Eiler. That's a no. Laura Klingensmith. That's a no. Joy Costin.
And no.
That's a no. Brent McCune.
McCune is a no.
That's a no. Eric Michelson.
Yes.
That's a yes. Ed Peterson.
Yes.
That's a yes. Don Ratan.
No.
That's a no. Leslie Riverola.
Leslie Riverola, no.
That's a no. Don Roberts.
Don Roberts, no.
That's a no. Kyle Russell. That's a yes. Paula Swatch.
That's a yes.
That's a yes. Brenda Sharp.
Yes.
That's a yes. Greg Shelton.
Yes.
That's a yes. Greg Smith.
No.
That's a no. Zach Thomas.
Yes.
That's a yes. Chair Musel.
Chair votes no.
Chair, I've recorded 7 yeses, 18 nos. Therefore, it failed.
That's the count I have. Thank you for the discussion, everybody. The next item for an amendment is proposed by Commissioner Paula Schwak it's on your agenda on the amendment or attachment page 2. And this one is a little more complicated because it is deleting some language from the current charter and adding some language. But Deputy Clerk Sater, would you please read the proposal?
Modify Article 5 as follows. Modify Article 5 as follows. 1, modify Section 5.02, Bullet 1, Sentence 2 to read as follows. Except as provided by law or this charter, the county manager shall appoint, suspend, or dismiss all non-elected department directors and division heads, including the county clerk, the register of deeds, and the county treasurer. The statutory duties of the county clerk shall be performed by, or as necessary, consolidated under the authority of, and as delegated and assigned by the county manager. The statutory duties of the register of deeds shall be performed by the county clerk, or as necessary, consolidated under the authority of, and as delegated and assigned by the county manager. The statutory duties of the county treasurer shall be performed by, or as necessary, consolidated under the authority of, and as delegated and assigned by the county manager. Item number 2, modify Section 5.05 by deleting bullets 1, 2, 3, and redraft the remaining provisions, subject to read as follows. Sheriff shall be elected, subject to amendments as provided or allowed by law. The commissioners shall review and approve the sheriff's budget. The sheriff's office is subject to the personnel policies and procedures established by the BOCC and all other administrative policies adopted by the commission to the extent not inconsistent with law. While the district attorney of the 10th Judicial District is not a county official, this elected state position shall comply with administrative policies adopted by the commission to the extent not inconsistent with law.
Thank you, Linda. Commissioner Schwak, would you like to explain your proposal? And again, we're on second reading, but I'm going to allow some discussion about this. So Paula, would you like to go ahead and explain this?
No, I
Re-explain.
think we've debated this a great deal, and the only thing I want to say is that I think the comments that we have received from the public are a primary reason to clean up this section in Article 5, that there is great misunderstanding about who has what role and whether it's constitutional or statutory, even though it's clearly statutory. And that by making this clear in the charter, the public education that will result from it should be of benefit to all voters. I don't have any other comments, Chairman Musel.
Thank you. Thank you, Mayor. Comments or questions about this proposal? Anybody in the room here? Anybody on Zoom? I do think one that has been raised to me, Mayor, is that the language you deleted includes language that indicates these positions are appointed. The language that would replace it would simply say they're subject to delegation and assignment of duties as determined by the county manager. They also continue to include the titles, which are not part of the management structure established since the 2000 charter amendment. One of the things, at least a minimum I would suggest, is that somewhere we include language that confirms what this commission decided earlier, which is that those positions would remain appointed. And that is included in all of the current charter language. Is that your intent, that all these would continue to be appointed?
I think that sentence 1 states that the county manager shall appoint all non-elected department directors, including.
Okay. Other comments by members of the commission? Well, we're all very slower tonight. I have some comments on this. I think, number one, to the extent it is intending to clarify, it probably confuses more than it clarifies. It restates things already in the charter. It restates things already in statutes with respect to the sheriff, approval of the budget, subject to Board of County Commission, personnel policies adopted by the Board of County Commission. It in many ways attempts to sidestep the direct issues by saying to the extent not consistent or not, to the extent not inconsistent with state law. I think the current charter says that the sheriff's office is required to comply with policies adopted by the county commission. I'm looking back at section 5.05. And I think the district attorney is in a similar position. I appreciate that Commissioner Schwak has done the most work as far as trying to clean up some of the other language that is historical from the 2000 adoption, but I don't believe this does that or clarifies or could be explained to the voters. And here's a concern I have about voters. If we're going to change something and we have to explain why, which I can't even effectively do today, we're going to get voters of all stripes to believe somebody somewhere is trying to sneak something by for some reason. That is not what's happening here. But that's what we're going to have. And for those reasons, I think it would be a mistake to put this on the ballot. Commissioner Boehm?
Mike Boehm, for the record. I appreciate the mayor's work on this and the other cleanup language that she has proposed. From day one, though, our discussion centered a lot on, do we want to go to the expense of an election for cleanup items? I think as you state, Mr. Chairman, this doesn't clean it up. It just changes the unclear words to more words that are unclear, and probably does create some suspicion that we don't need. I would hate to see the taxpayers have to fund an election for what I consider a cleanup bill that doesn't accomplish that and for no other purpose. So I will vote no on this.
I see no other hands up in the room. Is there anybody on Zoom that would like to comment on this before we vote? Mayor Michelson.
I just have a question, and having advanced one of these, I mean, Mayor Schwalk is welcome to answer, but anybody else is willing, I'd welcome them chiming in if they have opinions one way or the other. So as not to put that burden solely on the mayor, but I do have a question, and that is, I think I have a sense, this has been referred to as a cleanup amendment. Does anybody characterize or believe this to be anything more than that? In other words, is there a substantive change here that anybody sees or intends? I guess would be my question. Maybe first to you, Mayor, if you want to respond, but anybody else who's identified one, I would like to know that. I have my own opinion about that, but I'm not 100% certain. So I just put that to the group.
Mayor Schwalk, would you like to respond first?
Well, I would like to make this statement. You know, I proposed this in the alternative, both as a recommendation and as an amendment, anticipating some of the arguments that the chair has made and that Mayor Boehm has made. And I leave it to others as to whether or not they believe this constitutes a substantive change.
Anybody else want to tackle Mayor Michelson's question? Commissioner Smith?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I've stated this several times during the discussions we've had on this. This is duplicative. It does nothing but restate state law. There's no need for it. It really doesn't change anything. It just says the same thing a little bit differently, and it isn't worth the expense to put this on the ballot.
Somebody from Zoom? Tedrick House, Commissioner House?
Briefly, I was just thinking about Eric's question. I don't know if it's a direct answer, but if we put this on the ballot and it doesn't affect the substantive change, it just basically, I think the point is to confirm that the sheriff is beholden to the policies otherwise, unless otherwise provided by law. What happens if the public votes no on that? I mean, it creates this sort of question or inconsistency about what the public feels about that aspect of the charter. I feel as though my understanding is that the sheriff is subject to the language as set forth in the statute. And if there's an issue with that, there should be a way of dealing with that through the statutory enforcement mechanism.
I will read the last bullet point in 5.05 says the offices of the elected county sheriff and district attorney shall comply with the administrative policies adopted by the commission, meaning the Board of County Commissioners, to the extent not inconsistent with law. So, you know, I guess lawyers could argue about what that means, but it seems pretty clear to me that there are certain provisions of law that the county commission cannot do to the sheriff. And it has to be an action of the county commission itself before the administrative policy would be an obligation of the sheriff. Deputy Clerk Sater, would you call the roll on Commissioner Schwalk's amendment?
as we did last time, I will be switching up the order as we vote each time. Zach Thomas,
Zach Thomas, no.
that's a no. Greg Smith,
No.
that's a no. Greg Shelton,
No.
that's a no. Brenda Sharp,
Yes.
that's a yes. Paula Swatch,
Yes.
that's a yes. Kyle Russell, that's a yes. Don Robert,
Don Roberts, no.
that's a no. Leslie Riverola,
Leslie Riverola, no.
Don Ratan,
Yes. Yes.
that's a yes. Ed Peterson,
Ed Peterson, no.
that's a no. Eric Michelson,
Eric Michelson, no.
that's a no. Brent McCune,
Brent McCune is a no.
that's a no. Joy Costin,
Joy Coastman is a no.
excuse me, Joy. What was your vote?
No.
Thank you. That's a no. Laura Klinging Smith, that's a no. Chris Eiler, that's a no. Randy Hutchins, that's a no. Tedrick Hausch,
No.
that's a no. Jimmy Gaona, that's a no. Jane Dirks,
Jane Dirks, no.
that's a no. Jim Denning,
Denning votes no.
that's a no. Vicky Charlesworth,
Vicky Charlesworth, no.
that's a no. Karen Brownlee,
Karen Brownlee, no.
that's a no. Mike Boehm, that's a no. Wendy Bengesser,
Wendy Bengesser, no.
that's a no. Chair Musel,
Chair votes no.
that's a no. Chair, I have 4 yeses, 21 nos. It fails.
Thank you. That matches my count. We are done with consideration of amendments. One of the things that we've heard in some of the citizen comments that have been posted to the website is that we shouldn't be asking questions and we shouldn't be proposing anything. And I want to applaud everybody that proposed something as an amendment, even if it didn't succeed, because it allowed us to discuss it as a commission, which is what I think is good and was what is basic to a democratic process. So I want to thank everybody for their discussion and their consideration, and especially those who had the gumption to put forth an amendment. The next thing we have on the agenda for today, number 2, we had determined earlier, Mayor Schwak has proposed a couple of other cleanup amendments, such as getting rid of some of the references in the charter to what was in place for the year 2000 vote. We had as a body.
This is Mayor Schwak, not to interrupt you, sir, but I had agreed previously that if there were recommendations going forward,
You cut out at the end, Mayor. I think you were going where I was going, which was
Yes.
if there were no amendments to be placed on the ballot, then we would not simply place a cleanup amendment on the ballot. Is that your intention?
yes, that's my intention.
Okay, all right, so I had indicated to you by email, members, that we would move on to recommendations. We don't have a specific process in our rules for recommendations. We don't have a first reading, a second reading, but we did ask that everybody provide proposed amendments by close of business last Thursday so they could be placed in front of the commission. And we have now 4 of those with the conversion of Commissioner Hutchins proposed amendment to a recommendation. And Randy, just let me ask quickly, is that different enough that we should, because I got it in writing before the meeting, right before the meeting. I'm going to suggest for yours, especially given the time we have, that we circulate that and discuss it and vote on it on January 26th. If we present it today, if we have time at the end of the day, we'll present it. Is that fair? I'd like to get to the three that were already on the agenda. Yeah. Yeah, go.
Yes, so the recommendation is more from a recommending and a process point, working with commissioners and Chair Eiler and finance. We were able to come up with some finite numbers that would be very similar, but again, it's more process related than it is obviously an amendment related.
I think because it's not a completely new concept, but it's a new description and a new process, that it would be fair to the commissioners if they saw it in writing before you present it. So we'll do that before next meeting and plan on having you explain it at the start of the meeting on the 26th.
Very well.
Okay. The other proposed recommendations that we had, one comes from Randy, one comes from Commissioner Brownlee, one comes from Commissioner Schwach. So let's start with Randy's recommendation to reorganize subcommissions not currently under direct control of elected county commissioners and the charter commission to a structure that is. And again, these would be non-binding recommendations by the charter commission to the Board of County Commissioners and would still take 13 votes to be recommended. So Randy, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. The point in this is it came from comments directly from the commissioners themselves and some of the folks from public comments. They felt as if utilizing so many subcommittees create a situation where the voters who elected the county commissioners were losing control such. There weren't necessarily term limits in those commissions, nor were those elected individuals. And it was thought that the voters wanted more control of what was happening. I think an analogy that we're all familiar with is companies creating shell corporations. We don't want a situation where we're creating a shell corporation. We want to make sure elected officials have direct control of what's transpiring within the county.
Could you help me understand what you mean by subcommissions?
Yes, so we've got different commissions that have been established. We'll use Parks and Recs as an example. We don't have a real voice in those Parks and Recs commission. As a member of the unincorporated area, we saw thousands of acres of our farm ground taken, of which we're not allowed to farm, nor are we allowed to continue to hunt on. Those rights have been taken from us, and we don't feel like we've had a say in that regard. That's just an example. We want that more directly under the control of the county commissioners. That way, when we vote, we have a say in that regard.
We discussed earlier that, what do you call them, subcommittees or something else? Parks and Rec, Library, Board of Health. I'm not sure what other ones, I'm looking to county staff, but those are statutory bodies. So are you recommending, would your recommendation be that the county commission go to the legislature and undo the current statutory structure of like those three in particular? I don't know if there are other ones, but those three: Library, Parks and Rec, Board of Health, Airport Commission. Those four at least are statutorily created bodies, some of which were then approved by the voters of Johnson County, I think. So I want to make sure that we understand the scope of your and subcommissions. You're not planning commissions are in a sense subcommissions of the Board of County Commissioners, but those again are statutory bodies appointed by the county commission.
certainly not looking to do anything that disqualifies it from a state statute perspective whatsoever. But even though that there's something been put on the ballot, does that mean it falls outside the control of our elected county commissioners? If it does, then how is the general public able to ensure that their will is being carried out after they do vote for a certain measure?
Okay. Questions? Mayor Beam?
Again, Mike Bay, I'm not sure we have discussed or what our methods will be here. Is this considered a first reading or a second reading, or how are we going to handle this?
Yeah.
I think this is so broad and as involved as I've been, I don't know what subcommittees mean for sure. Before I'd want to take action on this, I would want to have a list of those subcommittees, know their statute origin or creation by the board, their purpose, their current roles, responsibilities, things of that nature. So I'm voting on a finite list of things. I mean, most of the boards are appointed by commissioners. So the direct control is the commissioner's appointment process. And I think that's the same with library and parks. I'm not sure how airport authority works, but maybe the same thing on all four of these. That's the direct control to the commission, the elected body, but not to the voters. And if we lump those, and then I think those are all created in statute. So short of going back to Topeka and undoing that, which I'm not sure we'd want to do. I mean, they have budgetary authority, but it's approved by the county. I would want to understand how all of those four in particular, but if it's a broader description of subcommissions than just those four statutory ones, I would certainly want to know that entire list, what they do, how their current practice is, how they're appointed, how they're accountable to a voting body, which I think they all are. Or I think they're probably reporting to a city manager with a liaison from the elected world. Actions that are taken are required at the board level to approve these. We have several recommending boards in the cities, but they don't have any authority beyond recommendation. So I would want to understand that and narrow this down to I knew exactly what I was voting on, as opposed to a big project.
I think
I
that's a
don't
fair
think
question.
If we
I'm
don't,
not,
if we don't get the commission a little more direction than that, or with a recommendation, I understand it's a recommendation, they can take it or leave it. But if that came to me as a commissioner, I don't know where I'd begin if I wanted to tackle it because it's so broad and vague.
I think I've been pushing us to get our amendment votes done and we did that tonight, so thank you. I think we can put off all votes on recommendations till the 26th. And if people have questions about these individual recommendations, make them tonight or present them to the proponent as soon as you can so that they can get something back out. We'll try to get something more detailed. If the proponent wants to get something more detailed, we'll do it before the January 26th meeting. So I think it's a good point. Let's not vote on anything tonight since these were necessarily generalized recommendations when they were submitted back. I think this was submitted way back in November, Randy, before we got into a lot of discussion. So other questions or comments? Commissioner Russell, Commissioner Eiler, and then Commissioner Peterson.
I don't know the answer to this question, but I think I would like to know before voting on this one. Are there any, maybe somebody here knows it, are there any boards, commissions, advisory boards, anything like that under the county government that are not appointed by or otherwise directly accountable to the Board of County Commissioners?
Yeah, I don't have the answer to that question. I can talk about certain specifics. In my 40 years of volunteering with the county, I've served on the MedAct board, the mental health board, zoning boards, and the planning commission. In each case, I was appointed by my county commissioner. I suspect, although I don't know, the same is true for Parks and Rec, and library board and the airport board and the others. Otherwise, I don't know how these people would get on those positions. It has been my practice every time a new county commissioner comes in to submit my resignation to them for whatever board I'm on at the moment. One time they took me up on it, which turns out was just fine with me. So in that sense, my only question to you, Randy, with regard to this recommendation, because I do think board members on these subcommissions or commissions need to be accountable. But I also have never run for anything. Well, student council once, but I've never run for anything in my life. And I don't want to be involved in elective politics in any way, but I'm always happy to help serve if I'm competent.
Commissioner Peterson?
Question for Randy. We've heard a lot of frustration from the comments from the public about not feeling that they're heard and also wanting greater accountability. Is it your hope with this type of a recommendation that you'd have the elected officials actually making more decisions directly?
To answer in short, yes.
And so would you like to remove some of these boards so that all of these decisions just come before the Board of County Commissioners?
Frankly, I don't know that I have the answer to that.
Okay.
Other comments or questions for Commissioner Hutchins? Oh, Commissioner Riverola?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I will say the same thing that I said when this came up in November, which is I was told at the time that this wasn't intended to target the commissions that are set up with statutory authority. And that's in direct conflict with what I just heard described as what we're trying to do here. And, the voters approved the statutes that are in place for, particularly, I'll speak about Johnson County Park and Recreation District. And when you talk about the services that our citizens enjoy and appreciate, it consistently ranks as, if not the highest, one of the highest things. And I just feel like whether it's a recommendation or an amendment, we're trying to solve problems that aren't problems. If the issue is accountability of our elected officials, and our voters need to go to the ballot box and make their voices heard if they don't like what's happening at the county level. And I have no idea what we're talking about on parkland being taken away from people, because I've been on the Park and Recreation District as an appointed member for the last 6 years, and I am unfamiliar with anybody's being taken from them. So I think words matter. I think what we write in our recommendations matter, and I am going to strongly oppose this.
Thank you, Commissioner.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, Commissioner Hutchins.
I'm getting good feedback from my peers, so I would like to offer up that I bring back more detail and get much more structure around it. Get more educated around it, quite frankly. I know what the intent was, but I'm not sure how exactly to get there and if it's the right path. So if you don't mind, I'd like to come back with something more specific to discuss and
I think-
see if there's a logical path forward.
I think that would be helpful. I'm thinking this will apply to the other recommendations as well. Our next meeting is January 26th, so a week from now would be the 17th. Friday would be the 21st. Is that, if we do it like we did with the recommendations, what Thursday, is Thursday the 20th? Close of business Thursday the 20th for anybody that's proposing a recommendation to provide their final written description of what they're asking for. Is that agreeable to the commission? give you about 10 days. I'm looking at Randy, but we also have two other people. I can't see Karen or Paula on the screen, but let me know if you don't think that is enough time.
Chairman, can I just ask that if we are going to vote, that we vote? I feel like we've amended some of these things multiple times, and I'm kind of ready to call the question, if you will. That's at some point, but you know better than I the remaining tasks that we have to achieve before our time is up.
I thank you for that. I think whatever you submit, whether it's your current proposal or what you submit by close of business on January 20th, as a proponent of a recommendation, that's what we're going to vote on. And if it's ambiguous or unclear or whatever, I think you will suffer the fate of some of the other proposals that we've had. But I agree, we've been open to discussion and changes as we went along. And we're now to the point where January 26th will be less than a month from when we have to submit our final report. So we need to resolve these on January 26th. And we'll need a detailed written proposal of any changes in the actual language by close of business on January 20th. Is that okay with you, Commissioner Schwach and Commissioner Brownlee?
Sure.
Works for me also. Thank you.
Thank you. And then Randy, you'll have one at the end too, that you've submitted some information on the amendment turned to recommendation. Okay, any other discussion on Commissioner Hutchins' first recommendation? If not, we'll move to Commissioner Brownlee's recommendation on continued effort to move forward on consolidation of rural fire districts in Johnson County. Commissioner Brownlee?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think my interest in this was stemmed by my involvement on the Olathe City Council when we would annex land. Often that could include that those citizens then would be covered by the Olathe Fire Department, and they would experience probably a lower tax levy for that service, and they would experience the high level of service that we have come to enjoy in Olathe from our fire department. I do understand that there has been at least one successful consolidation, and that was more recently. I believe it was just last year, maybe last fall. I did talk to the Olathe Fire Chief and the County Chief, Mr. Francis, as I considered this. And the term that I caught from Mr. Francis is that what they would like to achieve is a standardization of service. And so no ulterior motives here, just excellent service, and try to provide it in a manner that has appropriate governance and best value for the tax dollars.
I'm going to look to Deputy County Manager Thompson and County Councilor Dunham. Is there an easy way to provide this commission, since we haven't talked about rural districts at all, how they are established, and something in writing that we could see before we tackle this?
Yeah.
I'm trying to recall as we talk about this, most of the districts, the existing rural districts were passed by resolutions, my recollection. And I can't recall if those if they were petitions by the landowners, if they went to vote. I would have to pull the resolutions to find the origin of those. And then there's been a number of consolidations, depending how many decades you go back, you would find a number of consolidations, again, without the resolutions in front of me. I wouldn't be able to summarize that really well. But
And I'm not asking you to now. I'm just thinking between now and January 20th, I don't know how many rural fire districts we have. And, some history of that and how they're created, and then what's been consolidated recently, I think would speak to Commissioner Brownlee's question.
Yeah, right now we have 3 rural fire districts, but we'd be happy to put together a summary.
And are those created then by resolution of the county commission? I want to make sure this is kind of within our authority to even recommend. Or are these done by landowners, voters within that particular district? That's a question you could answer
Yeah.
for us. I don't know
We'll
anything
have to
about it.
look.
Questions for Commissioner Brownlee? Commissioner Boehm?
I don't oppose this. I don't know that I support it either. Lenexia's thrown out in the language as one of the major city fire departments. But we've not talked with our chief or our council at all about potentially taking over. And I'm not sure, unlike the Olathe example that Commissioner Brownlee cited, we don't have any unincorporated area around our city anymore. We are surrounded by incorporated cities. I don't want to be put in a position that the county decides fire for west of Lenexa should be paid for and provided by a newly created district, however we would call it, that is Lenexa plus the consolidated fire district that's out that way right now. If there is one, I mean, I don't know if DeSoto provides their own fire or if that's a consolidated district. So all of a sudden to just, I mean, normally if we take a private road into the city, they have to bring it up to standards and we'll take over maintenance thereafter. This would not be merging of equals. And I don't know how I would be expected to tell our residents that we now are responsible for whatever consolidated district.
Maury.
Okay, but what's the?
Could we speak into the mics more clear, please? Thank you.
If you look at the actual wording and purpose, though, it cites cities, not just consolidated. And unfortunately, the pages aren't numbered, but if you look 2 pages from the end of today's packet, you will see in the purpose and reason, cities are being brought to the table without any, and again, I know this happened in some areas in Olathe or Overland Park in an existing fire district that did consolidate, I believe. But that would have been handled not by a county commission order as opposed to an agreement by the 2 parties.
Thank you. And I think we need to be careful with language here. We're talking about a consolidation. The instance you're just referring to, Mayor, was not a consolidation. That district is still intact as a distinct taxing fire district. They have contracted out for service provision.
I think this needs a significant amount of background because despite our County 101 lessons, which took months, we did not discuss rural fire districts or their interplay with city-created fire departments. So Commissioner Brownlee, can you work with staff to put something together for us to clarify that?
I would be glad to, and then bring that back for the next meeting. Correct?
Yes.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Would we want that also
Oh, yes.
by January 20th?
January 20th, close of business,
Thank you.
please. The next recommendation then is one by Commissioner Swack about dialogue within the Charter Commission. I suppose I ought to read it. Or Linda, do you want to read that into the record?
The dialogue within the Charter Commission and the public comments received made apparent a lack of public understanding of the balance of authority between the BOCC and the Sheriff's Office. On one hand, the sheriff is an elected position with some independent statutory authority. On the other hand, this authority is statutorily circumscribed by the general power of the BOCC to establish personnel policies and procedures and pay plans for county employees, and the power to review and approve the budget for the operations of the Sheriff's Office. The Charter Commission recommends that the BOCC budgetary process include and result in 1, a clear statement of the statutory duties of the Sheriff's Office, 2, a line item budget which identifies funds required to meet these statutory duties. 3, a line item budget which identifies funds for discretionary programs and projects. 4, a budget total which combines the two and which may not be exceeded without additional approval of the BOCC.
Thank you, Linda. Mayor Schwak?
Yes, during the process of receiving the legal opinion from Folston, they identified a particular Supreme Court case, and it was primarily the case that they relied on for their legal opinion. And the ambiguity that it identified is this distinction in law between statutory duties, which include operation of the jail, and more discretionary duties, for example, performing dispatch countywide, for example. So if that's the distinction in case law, it seems to me that it would behoove us as taxpayers to have a budgeting process which identifies those distinctions and deals with it up front so that we reduce the amount of ambiguity. Not only that, I think it would result in a better budgeting process.
Mayor Michelson?
I guess if we're going to be voting on this at the next meeting, I would love to get a primer on what the current budgeting process for the sheriff is and what, prefer it from the county if that's okay. Appreciate that. I prefer it from the county staff. And also what, if any, involvement or oversight or approval the county commission currently exercises in that budgeting process for the sheriff. I don't know the answers to those. I would love to know the answers to those.
I think that can be provided jointly by the sheriff's office and the county manager, probably, or the Board of County Commissioners as necessary. But that could clarify some of this, what goes on now. Other questions or comments for Mayor Schwak? Commissioner Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's no secret that I'm an employee of the sheriff's office, and I'm aware of the budgeting process. It's described in statute, KSA 19-805, that the budget shall be submitted to the Board of County Commissioners for their approval. There's also been a lot of case law concerning this at the state and the federal level. And in Kansas federal court, there was a decision that came down that said once the budget has been approved, boards of county commissioners in Kansas lack authority to determine how a county sheriff expends budgeted funds. So they can approve the budget, but once it's approved, that's the budget. The sheriff doesn't have to ask for permission. He or she doesn't have to put in a proposal unless it exceeds the amount that was expended for his budget. Then he has to go through the process just like anybody else. Everything that's in this recommendation is in statute. It's just like the amendment. It's duplicative. Let's reword it a little bit because it makes people feel better or something. I don't know what the deal is, but it doesn't change anything. I'm not going to support it.
Mayor Schwak, can I ask a question? When you, in your item number 3, you want a separate line item budget identifying discretionary programs and projects. I assume you mean any of those funds that are not required, in somebody's opinion, to meet statutory duties?
Yes, sir, that's exactly right. And that's the distinction that the case law makes.
And that distinction would then be made by the county commission?
Jointly with the sheriff's office.
Okay. Other questions or comments? Mayor Michelson?
I actually take up your offer, Commissioner Smith, if I may, to ask a question about your understanding about what you just described. On one extreme, you're saying that the budget is approved by the county commission. Is that just the giant aggregate all-in number, you can spend X? Or is that a sort of a detailed budget within that overall number, this much for this program, this much for that program? And the sheriff must stay within those parameters for the subcategories, or is it just a top line amount? If you know, and I appreciate feedback from the county on that as well.
Yeah, my understanding of it, after talking with our finance director at the sheriff's office, I sat down and had a discussion with him. We submit a line item budget, just like any other county department does, for the BOCC to look at and approve as they see fit. There are certain statutes that govern how that is. There are some things they can't disapprove because it's required by statute. For example, the sheriff's responsible for the jail and everybody that's in it, the care and custody of all those people. So that has to be funded. But it's all laid out what the money's for, what it's to be spent for.
And it's your understanding that those line items that are approved by the county commission for the individual budget amounts
We
must
lay
be
out a line item budget for them to look at. Whether they do or not, I don't know.
and then the sheriff is bound by that, by those line items as well as by the top line number? Is that?
That's my understanding of the
Okay,
process.
okay, thank you. If you disagree with that, maybe by the next meeting, the county staff, I'd love to have input on that. Thanks. I think a simple way to ask the question is if $100 are allocated to jail for next year, can the sheriff only spend 10? That's kind of what you were getting at. Yeah, or if they only spend 10 on the jail, can they take the 90 they didn't spend on the jail and put it into something else and spend more on that something else than the county approved for that something else? That's sort of where I'm going with that. Yeah. Commissioner Schwalk, you showed up on the screen. I don't know if that's because you had something you wanted to make a comment. We also have Commissioner Hausch.
I was just seeking clarification that you are asking county staff to provide this information, not me.
That's correct.
Thank you.
The same with Commissioner Brownlee's. We're not expecting you and Randy too, working with county staff to present something that is hopefully a little more clear by January 20th. Commissioner Hausch?
I appreciate that. Similar question to Mayor Michelson's. So I wonder if there's a finance director for the sheriff who's involved in this budgeting process. Not only would I like to hear from the Board of County, the county commissioners, budget people, but also from the sheriff's office, because even if there's an agreement on how it's supposed to work in the statute, I'm interested if there's a misunderstanding or any kind of dispute between the two as to, yeah, that's what you think it means, but we think it means that. To me, that's where clarity might be needed, and this might be worthwhile in terms of a recommendation, but I don't know the lay of the land in that regard.
Other comments from commissioners? My last comment on that might be that we had all 7 county commissioners in here. We had the county manager twice. I don't remember there being an issue raised as to the budgetary process being jointly pursued by the sheriff and the county commissioner. That doesn't mean we don't talk about it, but I think it might be informative. All right, Randy, why don't, we've got a few minutes. Why don't, can you take 5 minutes and talk, this isn't even your first reading. This is your preliminary first reading. This is the prequel to what you have in mind for your recommendation that, as opposed to your amendment. Are you ready to do that?
Excuse me, Chair, just so that everyone online and here knows, this is a draft recommendation that was sent to the chair and I right before this meeting, so it will not be in your packets. It has not been emailed to you. It's up on the screen right now. Thank you.
And this, I'm looking for a very general overview because members of the commission, you haven't seen any of this. I don't know. I haven't seen it, so I don't know how different it is from what you had proposed.
Okay, so I'll do my best to kind of summarize. So following multiple meetings and most importantly, the meeting that, not the meeting, but the email that came out Friday night on some challenges of things that could be done statutorily, what can be undone, what can't be undone. It basically led me to the conclusion that the best path forward to achieve my objective. Number one, getting better representation for the unincorporated area, and two, ensuring that there was proper funding going to the unincorporated area infrastructure appeared to work within the existing framework in which we had, in that instead of getting fiscal responsibility to the county trustees, which would have taken apparently another vote of the people to unwind the 1971 resolution, is to work within the existing infrastructure, leaving our elected county commissioners still fiscally responsible. However, with meetings, with the chair as well as my local county commissioner agreeing that there's a process of which we can put in place that will in fact give the people of the unincorporated area a voice, working through the county trustees, the existing zoning board, the existing planning development commission, that would bring that voice forward with recommendations on how to spend certain monies. So I felt like, and with other feedback that I got from other commissioners, that would be a good approach. The recommendation then became working with finance and public works, and determining, okay, what was the proper dollars, and working with public works, there were some projects that he estimated it would cost between $70 and $90 million. That would be his focus, and understanding that I already put forth a recommendation of 60 million. Then took that discussion to the county finance to understand how would we actually execute on that. At the same time, making sure it was reasonable. I arrived from those conversations at one, there would be a one-time move of $50 million from the county reserves into a reserve fund in public works, which can be spent, once it's in that fund based on the recommendations that came forth. And two, increasing the annual spend in the unincorporated area by $2 million annually. And that number totaling 5.65 million from what I took as a 5-year average spend of the road and bridge improvements was currently at 3.65 million. So based on our conversations, it felt like that was realistic of what we wanted to achieve in the unincorporated area from a spending perspective, to get it up to satisfactory conditions, and also keeping it within a process within the county that keeps it within state statute, does not require special voter approval, but also gives the people in the unincorporated area at least a say on what they would prioritize and how they would prioritize it to be spent.
We haven't seen, can you scroll down, Linda, just to see slowly if we can see the rest? Okay, there's quite a bit left there. Okay. Guys, I'm going to encourage commissioners to review this. We'll get this out tomorrow so you can look at it. And I think questions, let's see if on this one, since this is new, we'll submit questions to Linda, if you're comfortable, and Linda can then consolidate all the questions and send those out to everybody, including Randy, to try to answer before the 26th. And Randy, if he has any changes, would get those into us by close of business on January 20th. I don't think it's fair to go further into this today, since we haven't seen it. May have any specific questions about that at this point? we've got a few minutes left, and I wanted to cover a little bit about the process from here on. Linda, you may remind me, but I think our only two remaining meetings are scheduled for January 26th, where I hope we will complete voting on the 4 recommendations. And then we have a meeting on February 14th. Some point in that, we need to have a draft report and an adoption of that report. We also need, although minority reports do not require approval of the body, that's why they're called minority reports. We'll need those submitted by a certain time. And I think the last county commission meeting in February is, I didn't ask you about this ahead of time, Linda, I apologize. February,
The last meeting to present in February to the board is February 24th.
24th. So what I want to make sure we have enough time to do that. Mayor Michelson?
Yeah, just a question. This may be a dumb question, but if we don't approve any amendments and we don't approve any recommendations, what would the report say?
I think the reports that I see, it would be a high-level summary of the meeting schedule, maybe a list of the amendments that were considered, but more of a summary of minutes, maybe seconds of the meeting over this much time. I'm not convinced yet. We may have some recommendations to report. But otherwise, yeah, I don't think there's I see it as a pretty straightforward and a factual setting of here's who was on it, here's when we met, here's what was considered, here's what we did to learn County 101. And so I'm willing to take the first shot at that. What I would also ask is if there are 4 or 5 members of the body that would, if you're comfortable with, and I haven't covered with Ed or Dawn, either one as our executive committee, volunteer with me to be the first reviewers of the draft so we can get kind of different people from different perspectives to look and see if it makes sense. That would be, I don't think it's as long a report as the last time, although they didn't put anything on the ballot either. And they had a long report and we're obligated to report. So that's kind of my thought about going forward. And I don't know if we could get something, an initial review by January 26th, but I'm a little concerned that we might need another meeting in February. And so February 14th is our current meeting because that is the second Monday. We have been meeting on the 4th Wednesday. I think what we'll do is send out an email tomorrow, Linda, if you would, to see if people would be available on the second Wednesday, which is the 9th. So we could at least have 2 meetings in February. We won't take all the meetings if we don't need them. If we approve a report at the first meeting, we'll be done. But I wanted to put that on the table since we're going to be finishing voting on the 26th. Open to thoughts or other proposals. Anybody on Zoom or otherwise? February, I think the Wednesday is the 9th. I was going to stick with Wednesday and go to the second Wednesday instead of the 4th.
February 9th is the second Wednesday.
So-
Then we have a meeting scheduled for February 14th, which is a Monday. And then the third Wednesday would be February 16th, but the chairman offered the 9th.
And I suppose we could even do the 22nd, the 4th Wednesday. Or that'd be the 3rd Wednesday, wouldn't it?
The fourth
23rd, I
Wednesday
mean.
would be the 23rd. That's
Right.
the 4th, and the report
Yeah.
without a special meeting of the BOCC would need to be given on the 24th.
Our legal counsel is saying our 1-year deadline is probably before that.
Chairman, if I may, we were reviewing the rules of order that were adopted. And there's a schedule there for the final report in section 7 that we might draw your attention to that discusses a submittal of a final report and consideration at the second meeting following its initial presentation. And so there's a little bit of a time frame
Right.
in there. So,
And it says no later than March 1, 2022. I think there is a 1-year statutory deadline as
Correct.
well. I'm not sure when that falls. It depends on when you consider our first meeting.
it's March
Uh,
1.
Is it March 1?
It's March 1.
Well, I guess the plan we've had all along is to see something at one meeting, discuss it at one meeting, vote on it the next meeting. If we get in a time bind, we're either going to have a special meeting or we're going to have to suspend that rule and vote on something without having a week or two to look at it. So that's kind of the time situation we're in. So I think as long as we're all aware of that, and again, Mayor Michelson, this report is not going to be an opinion piece as opposed to a true report, factual report about who was on it, when we met, what we considered, and the reality is that no amendments were proposed. And if any recommendations are, we'll simply list those. So. Anybody have any thoughts on that? If not, I think we'll have Linda send out a request and you could think about February 9, 16, or 23. Hopefully not the 23rd. We can make one of those earlier dates work. Any questions from Zoom before I ask for a motion to adjourn? If not, is there a motion to adjourn? Moved by Commissioner Gaona, seconded by Commissioner Michelson. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
I
Opposed, no. Meeting is adjourned. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.